by far, this is probably the most complicated aspect of this build. There were multiple challenges. There was the figuring it out, then the fabrication, the fitting of everything, but certainly what drove me was this whole concept, this idea. I love the concept of the outrigger. Fast electrics, boy, when they came out with brushless, that was a game changer. The sheer number of pieces involved with this and the fitting of them. Very fun challenge. I had doubts that I could even pull it off. So I was at work when the idea came to me to bash this Proboat UL19 hydro hull into an outrigger. Look at that mess, would you? And yes, in the kitchen, no less. So I probably spent a week thinking about different aspects of the build, kind of fleshing out some of the details about how I was going to go about doing certain aspects of the build. So I am at a point where I'm just about ready to do the final epoxy and mount these sponsons to the rods. But I got one last operation to do, one more thing to epoxy. I have to put the left sponson back in the jig, and I want to show you how this all goes together. There's 20 formers that I had to make for the mounting of the sponsons, plus the basswood strips. I've marked all of them for orientation, direction, and which sponson they go in. I had the blocks marked, same thing. So I'm completely off the blocks now. We are getting ready to put this whole thing together. I have to mount or epoxy this former here to the to this boom tube. Last thing I have to do in the jig before I take it out of the jig, and I'll be blocking it up and working with the pitch gauge. Final alignment. I'll be able to get my final alignment because I have an inner and an outer doubler for each boom tube. Each one of them is located in a pocket. This got me out of a jam. It's what I call a reverse doubler. I've epoxied it to the boom tube, and in this case, using this as a doubler, it'll be epoxied on the other side. Normally with a doubler, if this boom tube here was going through the outside wall of the sponson, you'd put an inner doubler, make this hole slightly oversized, put this doubler on, and then you can adjust or move around in that oversized hole. This being a nice close fit, and then epoxy that doubler to the inner wall. In this case, here's my internal former. It's buried in there, and this is already epoxied to there, lined up in the jig. This piece, when I epoxied it on, it was done in the jig, and then now I'll put that epoxy on the inside there. It sits in the pocket. Then I'll be epoxying this on here, and there I have all the alignment of the boom tube, location and alignment. Something to note about using wood for the jig: I've been noticing some movement in it. I suppose it changes with the humidity and temperature in the house. When I originally built this, I noticed I had a slight twist up on this corner. Got a little worse. So I brought it back to where it was with this shim here. This screw's holding it in place. And I've been shimming, using little shims like this. What I'm doing with these is putting little shims like between the sponsons, maintain the squareness of the sponsons as I'm building. So that's what I'm doing. I'm monitoring it like with my square, and then also, like, I picked up on this movement here with my digital pitch gauge. Notice that corner coming up a little bit. So it's manageable, but just something to watch for the wood build jig. All right, back in the jig one final time. Simple matter of putting it on the board here, locating in this pocket. This shim is holding the place for the mold that I had on there for holding the fiberglass on the back corner. Run this screw into the sponson, tighten down my clamp. Here's one of the shims I was talking about. Guess at this, check it for square. Touch too much. Shim action. There we go. Nice square set up to the building board. 5 5/16. Checking out it's parallel. And there the sponson is set back up in the jig. This is the last thing before mounting the sponsons permanently. Be epoxying this former to this sponson tube. For this dry fitting, I have this tape holding it in place of the epoxy. But what I'm wanting to accomplish here is I want this sponson tube to cure to that inner former with perpendicular, no binding. So drop that in there, bring in the sponson rod. Everything's nice and free, no binding, and then let it cure this former in place. that should be the last operation in the jig. Next will be epoxy, and final epoxy all these formers in place with the tub blocked up. I'll be able to make my final adjustment to any alignment, and I figure if it'll be anything, it won't be parallel, it won't be height, just be the angle of attack. How well did I qualify that surface there? But getting the angle of attack on the ride pads. So what I figured to do is, if I need to move anything, sand whatever side of the former that needs moved before final epoxy. Check all the angles outside the jig, no tension on anything, and I can just shim the side. All I need is 3 sides to locate, and that should hold the angles.